Since the first Blair Witch movie came out, there's been a huge buzz around the Blair Witch and her mythos. People interested in this eerie lore, upon doing their deep dive, often came across a name that made them curious, and that name was Rustin Parr. Rustin, this supposedly normal guy, ended up getting entangled in the Blair Witch mythos so much that children in Burkittsville were told, "Go to sleep, or Rustin Parr will get you." What did this man do to get such infamy? Well, that's what we'll be finding out today. Grab your blanket and get cozy as we take a peek into Rustin Parr and his part in the chilling Blair Witch mythos. This is gonna be a terrifying ride. Before we get into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Backstory of Rustin Parr. The year was 1903, and Wilson and Charity Parr of Frederick County, Maryland, were blessed with two healthy baby boys, who they named Dale and Rustin. While this was a joyous moment for the Parr family, after all, they'd been trying for babies for a while now, the townsfolk did not share that joy at all. In fact, they were quite terrified of the Parr family. Rumors said that Charity had actually sacrificed a dead child to the infamous Blair Witch to get these two twin boys. You know how quickly rumors fly, and with this type of scary gossip floating around, the townspeople were rather avoidant when it came to the Parrs. Not that they were outcasted, they were simply kept at a distance. The family, despite all the rumors and gossip and side eyes, remained in their own town, and as the years passed, it became evident that like most twins, Rustin and Dale were not similar at all. While Dale was super active, a bit of an extrovert if you want to put it that way, Rustin was more closed up. Dale was the talk of the town when this outgoing and active nature of his soon started taking a bit of a sinister turn. People soon found out that Dale had been brutally attacking animals, which was definitely odd and problematic in its own way. What struck people as peculiar is how these animals never felt that scared or agitated around Rustin. Dale's aggression toward animals kept on growing, and everyone knew he was bad news. But things took a turn when, on a hunting trip at the age of 9, Dale was killed. Since he went on that trip with his father, everyone speculated that he was killed by his father because he was the child of the witch. Before the Parr family could get over the grief and horror of this incident, tragedy struck again. This time, both Wilson and Charity passed away, barely a year after Dale's death. Rustin was left all alone in this cruel world. So with no other choice, the young boy packed his bags and moved to Burkittsville to live with his uncle and aunt. His uncle was a carpenter, and while he did teach Rustin the ways around his craft, he also abused the poor boy a lot. Despite all the misfortunes handed to him, Rustin managed to keep his head high and enjoy his new life in Burkittsville. He would often venture into the nearby woods as it gave him a break from everyone, and he quite enjoyed the nature and wildlife there. Rustin never managed to finish school, and he dropped out after the 6th grade. However, that didn't stop him from learning everything he needed to know about the world, thanks to his uncle. When he reached his early 20s, Rustin decided that he wanted to live a quiet life. He no longer cared much about town life, and he focused every ounce of energy he had for the next 5 years on building his dream home. This 3-story house was built by his own hands in the nearby woods, where he found solace. The house was located next to the creek on top of a hill. He lived as a hermit, and while that made him strange in the eyes of people, anyone who encountered him would say otherwise. They say that although Rustin was reserved, he was an extremely amicable and helpful man, and he would often go out of his way to help hikers who found themselves lost in the woods. It was no secret that Rustin preferred nature more, but he would often drop by the main town, as his aunt and uncle still lived there, and he worked at his uncle's carpentry shop. However, things changed after his aunt's untimely passing. After the death of his beloved, Rustin's uncle decided to move to Baltimore, and Rustin's visit to the town became less and less frequent. He stayed in his cabin smoking his pipe, walking in the woods, and meditating. Every 6 months or so, Rustin would show up in the town to get all the supplies he needed, and then off he would go on his self-imposed exile. Things were going great for Rustin until, well, they weren't. On one of his many walks through the woods, Rustin noticed a woman dressed in a black hooded cloak. He tried to get a closer look, but she vanished. If this was a one-time thing, Rustin wouldn't have thought much about it, but the frequency of her appearances slowly started rising. However, whenever he would call out to her or try to get closer to her, she would disappear. Rustin wasn't scared of her, he was simply curious as to who she was. When the 1930s came around, Rustin noticed that the wildlife around him started to behave strangely. The animals that used to be friendly toward him and would often come near his house were now staying as far away as possible. He could see that his presence filled his beloved animal companions with fear. After getting kind of abandoned by the very animals he cared about so much, Rustin started hearing strange noises in his house. After days went by, the noises didn't stop, and Rustin became so scared that he couldn't sleep at night. On the off chance that he did fall asleep, Rustin's dreams were filled with the woman and her voice. She spoke in a strange language, repeating her words over and over again. What started in his dreams soon bled into his day-to-day life, as Rustin started hearing the woman's voice in his head even while he was awake. For a whole year, Rustin heard this woman's voice, and the more he heard her, the more he lost his senses. Rustin was always a bit superstitious, but now with the woman and her voice stuck in his head, he had become completely subservient to her. Soon after that, he could understand the words that she was saying, and he started obeying her orders without questioning them. Hoping this would stop her voice from coming back, he would sleep in the basement because of her orders. In fact, even though he tried to rationalize his behavior as paranoia and insomnia, as days went by, he became more and more delusional. In his journal, Rustin noted that he had heard someone coming down in the clearing when he was finishing up his roof. Who that person was is still not known. The townsfolk noticed that Rustin's demeanor had changed completely over time. Gone was the amicable, helpful man, and instead, what remained was this extremely suspicious man who barely ever showed up in town. Despite this deterioration in him, no one thought Rustin would end up doing the things that he did. Brutal things done by Rustin. The journal entry I told you guys about was dated June 5th, 1940. 6 months later, on November 13th, Rustin was ordered by the woman to go to the town and get the first child he found back to his house. By this time, Rustin was completely under the clutches of the woman and her horrible voice. Even if he wanted to, he somehow could not resist the orders, and so he went down to Burkittsville town and kidnapped Emily Hollins. For the next 6 months, Rustin would go to town and bring the first child he found back to his cabin, promising them candies and chocolate. He would then bring the kids down to his basement in pairs. He would make one child face the corner of the room while he butchered the other child in what was called a ritualistic killing. He would disembowel them and then carve symbols into their skin with knives. After killing the first one, he would do the same with the child who was standing in the corner. He had kidnapped 8 kids in total, starting with Emily Hollins on November 13th, 1940, and ending with Kyle Brody in July 1941. He murdered 7 kids this way, and Kyle was the only one who managed to escape. After kidnapping Michael Guidry on March 5th, 1941, there was an entry in Rustin's journal, dated March 13th, where he wrote about how he really wanted to resist the orders of the woman, but he simply could not. His killing stopped when one night, Rustin claimed he was visited by the old woman. While he could not see her in his dark room, he knew she was there, and she told him that he was finished. She said that she would leave him alone if he went to town and told everyone what he had been doing over the past 6 months. After hearing her voice for so long, Rustin was desperate to get rid of the voice. And finally, when he was given a way out, he was not going to miss out on it. So the very next day, he took Brody and went back into town. He told the townsfolk that he was finally finished and released the young boy. When the police managed to find his house after 4 hours of hiking through the woods, they found the mangled corpses of 7 children who had gone missing. As you can imagine, the entire incident tore the town apart, and when Rustin was further questioned, all he could tell the people was that he was following the orders of an old woman's ghost who supposedly lived in the woods near his house. We get to see Kyle Brody in the massacre of the Burkittsville 7, the Blair Witch Legacy. While Brody was the main witness for Parr's trial, the film archivist we follow in this movie, Chris Carrasco, deduced that it could very well be that Kyle was the mastermind behind everything. Kyle had a hard life, and after coming out of the kidnapping, his mental health declined further, and he was sent to the Maryland State Institute for the Criminally Insane. Janine, Kyle's sister, was also interviewed for this film, and Janine stated that Kyle was just a normal boy who went through some horrible things that affected him severely. Dominic Cazal, the priest who was present during Rustin Parr's execution, claimed that Rustin told him he never killed anyone. In his last living days, Kyle was seen curled up in the corner of his room, screaming "never given" over and over again. He was also found scribbling words in a language that was later identified as a forgotten witch language, called the Transitus Fluvi. As it turns out, this same language was found in Rustin's upstairs rooms. Kyle eventually took his life in 1971, and how he was involved in the murders with Blair Witch remained unsolved. The fate of Rustin Parr. Rustin was tried in court in July of 1941. He was tried for 7 counts of first-degree murder, and he confessed to all of them, even though he didn't know the names of the children. He apologized to the parents of the deceased for his crimes and never made a single excuse for his behavior. When his attorney pleaded insanity, Rustin agreed with the plea. Kyle Brody took an active part in his trial and identified him as the killer. As you can expect, the jury came forth with a guilty verdict. Rustin was sentenced to die, and on that day, some of the parents of the deceased went up the hills to the woods and burnt Rustin's house to the ground. In his last interview, Rustin told everyone that he did everything for the old witch, and whether or not people believed him, everyone found it odd that stick figures would often show up in his cell. After his confession to Priest Cazal, stating he never killed anyone, the priest insisted he tell the judge this information. However, Rustin did not give his consent to share his confession. 8 days after his trial, on July 23rd, the judge who sentenced Rustin to the death penalty was found dead in the W.W. Smith General Store. The shopkeeper Daniel Cole was initially arrested as the prime suspect in this murder. In his questioning, Daniel insisted that he had been framed and he was innocent. Finally, on November 22nd, 1941, Rustin Parr was hanged for his crimes, bringing an end to the tragic life of a tragic man. Marvelous verdict. So there you have it, folks. The legends behind this cryptic and unsettling person are shrouded in tragedy and horror. Whether or not Rustin deserved to be considered as a boogeyman by the children, one cannot deny the eerie occurrences that surrounded him, both in life and in death. With that, I hope those of you who are curious about his name in the context of Blair Witch have had their curiosity quenched. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and I'll see you all next time. If you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.